Happy Holy Octave. Hi, this is Father Randy, and we're on our second day of our Holy Octave. Monday, June 21st. It's also the feast of St. Aloysius Gonzaga. So St. Aloysius, one of Father Randy's dream team saints, knew from an early age that he wanted to be a Catholic priest. He wanted to join the Jesuit order. And yet his family, him being the oldest son and being of noble birth, they didn't want Aloysius to enter the seminary and become a priest, just because he was supposed to be the oldest son and take over the family inheritance. And so there was a kind of a war of nerves that got played out, and finally St. Aloysius went out, and he was so young that he needed a letter from his father to enter the Jesuit order. And so there's actually the actual letter that Aloysius got, Dad wrote to the rector of the Jesuit order. We actually have that letter. It's one of the most beautiful letters you'll ever read. In it, Aloysius' dad says, "I'm turning over to you, prior of the Jesuit order, I'm turning over to you my most prized possession." It was his son. And so there's always this image that Aloysius is one of those perfect sons of the church. And he wrote on his deathbed when he was only 23 years old, beautiful letters back to his parents, telling him not to grieve his loss. Aloysius wound up dying of the plague in Rome, just even before he became a priest. But this is the second day of our Holy Octave, and there's so much going on at these next 8 days. We started our octave on the feast of Father's Day, and we prayed a plenary indulgence for our dads, our deceased dads, grandfathers, and godfathers. That was the first day of our Holy Octave. And we gave away the little sacramental gift of a toolkit for all the men, all the boys that came to the Mass on Sunday. But the most important thing we did was work a plenary indulgence for our deceased men in our family that have been so influential in helping us to live out our Catholic faith. But the whole point of this Holy Octave was so that we can give thanks to God, and especially to Our Lady Most Admirable for seeing us through this pandemic. So now, July 1st will be the invocation, the revocation of the dispensation that the bishop had. So remember, from March 18th of 2020, we were dispensed from the obligation of attending Holy Mass on Sunday. Well, as of July 1st, that dispensation will be revoked, and we'll have to again attend Mass to make Sunday holy and receive the Eucharist in a state of grace if we're able to. And so that will happen July 1st. But we were praying all through the pandemic to Our Lady Most Admirable. We had that beautiful prayer that we said before all of our Masses, invoking your help to help us to continue to see how Jesus Christ hadn't abandoned us during the pandemic. It was just the farthest thing from the truth, that our Lord was even closer to us than ever before. And he even allowed us, with our bishop's permission, to work a spiritual communion. And so we didn't have to come to Mass during those days of the pandemic. We could watch the Mass on a YouTube video, which we had on our website, or you could watch the Mass from the Cardinal in Chicago or the Bishop in Rockford. Any kind of Mass would do on Sunday, and to make a spiritual communion. But now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we want to thank Our Lady for not only helping us to weather the storm of the pandemic, but that our faith, actually, we grew in our Catholic faith during the pandemic. Remember, I said, wouldn't that be one of the greatest things, that God is the only one that can take a good out of an evil. And so we had this evil of the pandemic. In a sense, Satan was saying, watch this, God. If I inflict a pandemic on these Catholics of Sublette and West Brooklyn and Maytown, they'll lose their faith. They won't even go to Mass. They won't make spiritual communions. I can make them lose their Catholic faith just by a little bit of hardship of the pandemic and the sickness that I put into their families through this virus. And God said, no, I know these Catholics at Our Lady of Perpetual Help and St. Mary the Assumption and St. Patrick's Church. They love me, and they love my son, and they'll continue to make spiritual communions, and they'll grow in their Catholic faith even during this time of the pandemic. And so the bet was on, and I think God won that bet. Isn't your faith stronger? Don't you have a greater belief in the true presence of our Lord Jesus Christ and the Eucharist? All those graces he gave you, even though you weren't physically able to maybe receive that sacred host, God still gave you all of the graces, all of the love of his son on Calvary. and his death and resurrection then. And so we're celebrating then this octave. In 8 days, we're celebrating the Mass, but 3 solemn Masses. So we had the Mass on Father's Day, and we dedicated that to St. Joseph and asked for his help in making a plenary indulgence. And then we'll conclude our octave with Our Lady of Perpetual Help's feast, which is next Sunday, June 27th. And so you probably got in the mail an icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Bring that icon to the Mass with you. So this Sunday, those icons aren't blessed. I'll bless them during the Mass, and then you can take those icons home. Another sacramental, just like we gave that toolkit on Father's Day to the men. We'll give every family that comes to the Mass this weekend a special icon they can take home and have Our Lady invoke her Son's blessings on everyone in your household then when you enthrone Our Lady's icon at your homes. But then in the middle, on June 24th is actually the feast, a solemnity of the birth of John the Baptist. So something unusual. We seldom celebrate the birth of a saint. We celebrate Mary's birth. Of course, we celebrate Jesus' birth. Those are the only 2 births that we really celebrate in the Catholic Church in our liturgies, except John the Baptist. Something special about John, that he was holy from the womb. Remember when Mary came at the visitation of John's mom, Elizabeth? John leapt for joy when he heard Mary greet Elizabeth, his mother. He leapt for joy in the womb. And so there's something about that 6 months that John the Baptist's birth preceded our Lord's. And so we celebrate June 24th as the birth of John the Baptist. And there's an old tradition that on June 23rd, on the vigil of the Nativity, that we would also celebrate a Mass, and that the priest would bless braziers or little fires, or in this case what we'll do is we'll bless a candle, and then you'll take the candle home, and from that candle you'll light a fire, a bonfire, to the honor of the birth of John the Baptist. So remember, today's June 21st, the first day of summer. The days have been getting longer and longer up until June 21st. And then after that, the summer solstice, the daylight hour starts to wane. And it wanes all the way until Christmas time. And so wasn't that what John said? He must increase, I must decrease. And so here we have, around the feast of John the Baptist's birth, the greatest number of daylight hours. And we celebrate John's coming into the world. And then now we'll celebrate, 6 months from now, we'll celebrate our Lord's birth, and then the increasing of those daylight hours after December 21st, 22nd, when the winter solstice is. But so it was a tradition that people would make bonfires on the evening of John the Baptist's nativity. So June 23rd, we'll have a special Mass at Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Sublette, and we'll bless candles, and then you'll take those candles home on that evening of Wednesday evening, and you'll light a little fire, a bonfire. And what's going on is God the Father looks down from heaven, and he sees a little fire, a little light growing in your backyard, the bonfire that you're making to celebrate the feast of John's birth. And God the Father calls his son and says, "What are your brothers and sisters doing now? Why are these little fires cropping up all over the place in the backyards of these parishioners from Sublette and West Brooklyn and Maytown?" And Jesus says, they're anticipating the last prophet's birth, John the Baptist. He was the last prophet that foretold my coming and pointed me out when I came. These good Catholics that never lost their faith during the pandemic, they're celebrating their holy octave with their crazy priest, and they're doing these things, practicing these sacramentals, so that they can show how much in love they are with you, God, that you've brought them through this pandemic, and you've pointed out the light of the world, myself, Jesus Christ, to them, and they're getting ready already for Christmas and my birth 6 months from now. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go outside, and I'll show you a little bit about, just because this sacramental is so different, we'll go outside and we'll continue this little presentation on our Holy Octave, and especially on the bonfire, or the St. John fire of June 23rd, the evening of. And since it's a little windy, we'll put our hats on and go outside, because we don't want to mess up our hair. See you in a minute.